So in this video, we actually can discuss the fiscal guidelines and also what are the weakness of the fiscal policies. So which means the government policymaker has to be aware no policy is perfect. So first, a primer of the fiscal guideline is called the simple rules. So simple rules, and the essence of the fiscal policy entails the deliberate shifting of the aggregate demand curve. So the steps required to the formulated fiscal policy are specify the amount of the desired AD shift. So which means what is the AD, what's the value for AD short form or the AD excess? And then select the policy tool needed to induce the desired shift. And so which means when we talk about if we have the receptionary GDP gap, so they should understand what would be the AD short form, and then government can decide should we do tax cut, or should we do increasing government spending, or increasing the transfer, or all of them, or two of three. So then it has to decide the policy tools. And similarly, if we have the inflationary GDP gap, and then they have to understand what's the value for AD excess, and then to decide do they do tax hikes or decrease the transfers or reduce the government spending or all of them. So that is the rule of thumb for the fiscal policies. That is simple and pretty straightforward. So you can see when I explain the rationale behind, it's very easy to understand. I believe the only confusion will be how to calculate those numbers because the formulas. But however, the formula itself is not hard to understand, and also they have lots of similarities as well. So now we need so in these charts and in these slides, it summarizes all the formula we learned. So that's why I said simple rules, and so we don't want to try to complicate things. So generally speaking, you have to know what is the desired physical stimulus. So, or what is the desired physical restraint. So they are it looks very similar. The numerator are a little bit different. So you have to know when we talk about physical stimulus, we have to have AD short form. And we talk about physical restraint, we should have the AD excess. So that's why the desired physical stimulant and the desired physical restraint, the numerator look different. They are the AD short form. However, the denominator are the same, the multipliers. So in terms of policy tool for the physical stimulus, we have increased government pictures, tax cuts, increased transfer. So the first two are a little bit different from the last two when we talk about desired amount. So for the increased government purchase, so the amount will equal to the desired physical stimulus. But if we talk about tax cut or increased transfers, so it actually equal to desired fiscal stimulus divided by IPC. The reason is because the last two, they are actually affecting disposable income instead of directly affecting economy. And very, very similar when we have the inflationary GDP gap. So the tool we have is reduce government purchase, increase tax, reduce transfer payment. So compare with the physical stimulus. So these policies are just totally opposite operation. So very similarly, so for the government purchase, the desired amount will be equal to the desired physical restraint. But when we talk about increased taxes or reduced transfer, they are the same, but they differ from the government purchase because it is equal to the desired physical restraint divided by the MPC, marginal propensity to consume. So this is the summary about what we learned. So next, what we'll discuss is what are the weaknesses of the fiscal policies that for the policymaker has to be aware. So first is called crowding out. So the crowding out is a reduction in private sector borrowing and spending caused by the increased government borrowing. So how this happens? So why this happened? So the fiscal policy guidelines are a useful tool but neglect a critical dimension of the fiscal policy. How is the government going to finance its expenditures? So some of the intended fiscal stimulus may be offset by crowding out of the private consumption and investment expenditure, which means actually the government's doing because you can think about if the government take a role to investing, So they are stealing the resource for the private company to invest in. So that is called a crowding out. So the private sector spending reduction offset the government spending, reducing the impact of the fiscal stimulus. Because we always have the scarce resource, every resource are limited. So if the government use it, and that means the private sector cannot use it. So when the King's theory came out, I think he didn't realize this crowding out effect. So this is one problem. And the second problem for the fiscal policy is time lags. And I don't need to say more. And so for the US economy or political structure, we know that every thing need to go through the debates. So take a little bit of time. So that's the second problem for the fiscal policies, that is time lags. And so fiscal policy is somewhat hampered because it takes time to recognize that a problem exists and then formulate a policy to address the problem. So in addition, the very nature of the macro problems could change if the economy is hit with the other internal and external shocks. So that's the second main problem for the fiscal policy, that's the time lags. So the last problem related to the fiscal policy, it is called pork barrel politics. Pork barrel politics. So you might already heard this term before. So here I want to give you a little bit of explanation. So what is that? So why this is the third problem for the fiscal policy, fiscal policies. So once a tax or spending plan arrived at the U.S. Capitol, the politics take over. So no member of Congress wants to spending cuts in their own districts. So if taxes cut, member of the Congress want their constitutes to get the biggest tax savings. No one in Congress wants to a tax hike or spending cut before the election. So this kind of the pork barrel politics can alter the content and the timing of the fiscal policy. So this is nothing you can change. And we can see this is created by the conflict of interest or etc. But this is the fact about the fiscal policy. It's widely used, and obviously being a student learning economic class, you have to understand what is the weakness for this kind of fiscal policy. It's the practical problems, crowding out, time lags, and pork barrel politics. So that's the end of this chapter, and I hope you're enjoying the fiscal policy. So in our last chapter, we will learn this semester. It's talk about monetary policy. So it's another set of policy that try to help economy back to the macro goals, stability, and full employment rate.